Hello, welcome to my channel Dharma Makes. Welcome to this Halloween project. I made a tiny coffin with a tufted interior and some shelves for storage. I started out with a blank wooden box with some metal hinges and closure that I'm of course removing so that I can paint the wooden box. Before painting, I did end up sanding a lot of edges and corners just to make sure that there are no irregularities and that I won't be getting any splinters while handling the box. I painted with a black acrylic paint, and this has really good coverage, so I actually ended up just putting on the one coat. I paint the interior and the exterior as well. The metal bits that came with the box were this bright gold color, and I want to tone them down a little bit. So I'm inserting all of the little screws into a piece of foam board just so that I can keep them in place as I'm painting their heads with the same black acrylic paint. And I'm of course painting the hinges and the closure as well. When the paint has dried on the box, I am adding a very light dry brushing of this really nice olive green color, but only on the exterior of the box because I have other plans for the interior. I liked the texture. I thought it worked really well. I wanted the outside of the coffin to not be too involved, and I wanted to see some of that wood grain texture. So this is what I went with. But then I realized it's a little bit too plain and it could use something. But I didn't want to add any really dimensional elements except for one centerpiece. So I went back to using this vinyl tape that I've had in my stash for something like 7 years. I never really used it that much until a recent project. And it is a little bit finicky to apply, and the stickiness is a little bit out of hand. Like it, possibly due to age, it seeped out from under the vinyl to all around and above. So although I try to clean it, it still stays sticky to the touch. But I'm going to solve that problem soon. I have 3 different patterns, and I'm using appropriate widths for the sections of the coffin as I see fit. I'm also creating a sort of pleasant shape right on the lid, cutting out segments of the vinyl shapes to form something that just looks right to me, like cutting out just one floret of that largest vinyl tape shape to form the cluster right on the lid. I'm actually really happy with this, but as I said, it was really sticky, and so I decided to paint right over it with another coat of black paint. So by painting right over it with the acrylic paint, I'm sealing it in, but I'm applying quite a thin coat so that the shape and the texture wouldn't be lost. Okay, so for the interior, I wanted to make a tufted, comfy bed. So I made a paper template of the exact shape of the interior, and I traced it on a piece of a sturdy cardstock, and now I'm cutting it out. This is going to be my base to build the tufting on. It was just a little bit too large, but you know, I fit measured it and I trimmed it until it was perfect. Now to make the cushiony bit of the tufting, I am using some kitchen sponges. Of course, these are brand new, they have never been used. And I'm just peeling off the scrubby side of it, because that's a bit rougher and I don't really need that much height. And I'm just sort of figuring out exactly how to arrange the sponges in a way that's going to cover the entire surface. And I'm just lightly adhering them down with hot glue. I didn't want to add too much hot glue because I know I will be sewing through this, and getting blobs of hot glue right under the needle would be a nightmare. So as you can see, I'm just patching and using up the sponges to cover the entire surface. I didn't want to have to use up a third sponge, so having it patched, it doesn't affect anything. It's basically just the stuffing. No one will see what's under there. Well, except you who are watching. So I've actually learned this tufting method from someone else here on YouTube, and actually this whole project was inspired by her work. I will leave a link in the description to the video that inspired me to make my own tufted coffin. So after I decided where those tufting points should be, I made little holes with my pokey tool, and I'm using a faux suede purple fabric to cover the piece with. I'm using some embroidery thread and a larger needle to do this. So I'm going back through the holes I've created with my pokey tool, going all the way to the other side and then back, and then squeezing quite hard and tying that thread really tightly with like 3 knots, just to make sure that it will never escape. And I do these for all of the holes that I created. It's a little bit fiddly and it's a bit hard to show on camera exactly what's happening. But all I'm trying to do is to make sure that it's taut and that it's even. I didn't quite succeed. It's not perfect, but it's my first try, and it was good enough, I think. When all of those points have been anchored, I'm going to glue the excess material around the base. I'm actually pulling it really tight to flatten and to bring out that nice cushiony texture that the tufting has created. So I'm just using hot glue for this because it sets really quickly and I wouldn't have to stay there and hold it for a long time. I'm just nicely wrapping over, folding over the entire piece. And there you go. I have a perfect cushioned little resting place inside of the coffin. I want to use the same fabric to line the lid of the coffin as well. I should have probably created a more careful template, but I'm just kind of winging it and folding over the edges and creating a flat lining this time. I didn't want this part to be cushioned, just lined. And I'm just folding over the edges to have those nice invisible seams. I'm working towards recreating that paper template, but somehow in the midst of folding it ended up a little bit wonky. I rolled with it, however, and I decided that I was going to hide all of those wonky edges. Now I want the lid to be a sort of storage place with shelves, and to create the shelves I'm using coffee stirrers. This is just because that's the only thin pieces of wood I have in my stash right now, but I'm using popsicle sticks that are wider would have probably been easier, but it's not a problem. I just glued 2 coffee stirrers next to each other to create a wider one. And then I'm actually using scraps of the same fabric to dress up the little wooden shelf straight into the fabric, just gluing it over with the fabric folded over on both sides. I was using a smaller glue gun. This one melts at a lower temperature because I knew I was going to be handling it a lot, and I was going to need to press the fabric in while the glue was still hot, and I always burn myself, so I decided that it was worth digging out the other glue gun for this. So I made that big horizontal shelf, and now I'm sectioning the top part into 2, and I'm applying the same method of gluing 2 coffee stirrers next to each other and then dressing them up into a bit of fabric. And one more shelf to split up that last rectangle-ish section to create one more small shelf. And then we're done. I've got nice little velvety shelves. Now to address those wonky edges where the liner is not perfect to the edge of the coffin. I'm just using more scraps of the same fabric, and I'm making these sort of folded bits. I'm basically folding it 2 times over so that it's sort of like a nice little roll without any seams, and I'm just gluing them in place all around the edges, hiding all the mistakes. I wanted to give a little bit of a vintage vibe to this coffin, because if there is a tiny vampire who it belongs to, they probably have old-fashioned tastes. So I'm using these teeny tiny crochet doilies to decorate some of the shelves. Oh, and of course, to complete the tufting, as it often is in real life, there's buttons inside of those tufting spots, but I didn't have buttons that were small enough, and I didn't feel like making some. I used some crystal looking beads. Now that the hard work on the interior is done, I am returning to the exterior, and I'm bringing back that nice olive green color that I painted it with originally. I think it works really well and brings out that vinyl tape texture beautifully. And I'm also applying some gold paint with my finger to make it shiny and just, I don't know, it's just part of my aesthetic. I can't help it. I think it looks good. And I applied a little bit of that gold to the painted hinges as well before I end up installing them at the end. Okay, now with all the construction part done, I have gone through my stash of miniature objects and I picked out quite a few that I want to use on this project. I've picked out wine bottles, potion bottles, little jars, a skull, 2 tiny pumpkins, lots of different things that, I don't know, one might find on the shelf of a tiny vampire. I'm just deciding on where should everything go, sort of creating a mock-up. I'm also using a few tiny books and scrolls and bits and bobs that just make it look interesting. For example, I'm trimming down a tiny little book so that it fits better on my shelf. A lot of these miniatures are handmade. Some of the smaller potion bottles are actually created out of beads and findings. And as I'm going along, I'm actually aging some of the items, like the pumpkins. They were looking a little bit too brand new and fresh. And I know I wanted to have a book inside of the coffin, as if the little vampire just stepped out and left the book she was reading. I also left some cards. Maybe she was playing solitaire. So I just glued those straight inside of the coffin. And I'm using a small amount of hot glue to fix everything down in the lid. Of course, because this will be closing and I didn't want anything to move at all. Sometimes I'm using a little bit of ink or a little bit of acrylic paint to change the color or modify something that it goes better with my aesthetic. Gluing in some scrolls on the bottom shelf, some fruit, pumpkins, maybe for snacks. Do vampires eat pumpkins? I have no idea. Maybe she's just keeping them for decoration, just like I do. This was probably the most fun part of the entire project, just arranging things in cute little clusters and deciding what goes where and imagining a sort of rhyme and reason for keeping any of these objects nearby. And here's a close-up of my little arrangement in the end. Struggled a little bit with the focus there. Now that everything is done, it's time to reassemble the box. So I removed all of those little screws from the foam core and I'm just reattaching everything. Some of the holes got filled up by paint, or they have bits of vinyl tape going over, so I'm just using a pokey tool to remake the holes so that I'm able to screw the little screws back in. Oh, but before I'm finished, I forgot that I actually wanted to attach this beautiful little charm that has the image of a rose under a glass cabochon in this sort of bronze setting. I think that's a very nice, tasteful decoration for the top of the coffin. At the moment, this is my favorite creation, at least out of the Halloween series. I had a lot of fun creating the little clusters and learning new techniques with the tufting. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Do let me know what you think about it. I would love to see your comments. Right now I have a series of Halloween themed videos until the end of October. If this is something that you enjoy watching, please consider subscribing to my channel. I will have new videos coming out every week. Thank you for watching. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye!